Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the clammy, slightly mold-scented reality of what it was like to pack for a long journey across India, if you were a European traveler in the 18th century, and also sort of oblivious to your own impracticality. You sit on a low stool in a guesthouse courtyard, the scent of boiled cabbage lingering from the noon meal, and unroll a wrinkled map across your lap. The paper is thick, the ink uneven. Roads are guesses. Town names vary by language, or mood, or spelling mistake. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry, you've brought 14 spare shirts and zero understanding of local geography. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Always love to see the sleepy map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your index finger traces a line, Calcutta to Benares, maybe onward to Delhi, or Bombay, if you're brave and optimistic and have no fear of elephants. But even now, the corners of your map are soft with mildew. It rained last night, again, and the guesthouse roof weeps at the seams. You squint at the map's legend, which seems determined to hide any actual legends. There are rivers you've never heard of and hills the mapmaker only hinted at, like a nervous afterthought. In theory, the East India Company sent you with decent paperwork and some recent charts. In practice, the recent part means someone copied them in 1754, and that person was not exactly a cartographic wizard. Historians still argue whether these maps were designed for navigation or just to make homesick Europeans feel less lost. Either way, you cling to yours like it's a holy text. You make a quick list in your pocket journal. Ink bleeds a little, it always does in this air, and the paper curls before you can write extra boots. You consider what the merchant in Madras said, follow the Grand Trunk Road, but beware the part near the mango orchards. Too many ghosts, he muttered, and you weren't sure if he meant bandits or literal ghosts. Either way, noted. The routes across India in the 1700s were stitched together from Mughal roads, market paths, and ancient trade arteries. Some had caravanserais. Some had dust and jackals and not much else. You fold your map again, clumsily, and wipe your brow. One of the things no one tells you is how much you'll sweat just from thinking about traveling. You try to memorize the next 10 stops, knowing full well you'll forget by morning. The names are musical and sharp-edged, and half of them are spelled differently in the logbook, your journal, and the guidebook you borrowed from that Dutch botanist who smelled like boiled ink. And what of the stars? You remember, vaguely, that some travelers navigate by them, but you pack no astrolabe. Just your eyes, some prayers, and that one time you accidentally mistook Jupiter for a fire signal. You are, in short, prepared in all the wrong ways. Still, you linger over the map like it's a bedtime story. Here's a town with a temple shaped like a lotus. Here's a river rumored to whisper at dusk. And here, a dry, flat patch labeled only, danger after rain. You circle that one. Just in case. Eventually you roll the map, tie it with fraying string, and tuck it into the side of your trunk, where it will stay until it's damp again and unreadable. But for now, it's your plan, your guide, your barely helpful prophecy. And somewhere in the next village, a man sells hand-drawn scrolls that are more accurate than your entire leather-bound kit. He's not on your map, of course. That would be far too helpful. You sit cross-legged beside your half-packed trunk, absolutely surrounded by linen. Piles of it. Soft, stiff, yellowed, embroidered, folded with purpose and confusion. The packing list from your patron's steward insisted, 10 linen shirts, 6 undershirts, 4 nightshirts, 2 formal white cravats, and spares for each. You counted 17 individual garments just for your upper torso, and not a single one seems designed to keep scorpions out. You've already sweat through 2 just trying to decide what to wear on the first day. The trunk, more a miniature sarcophagus with brass hinges, is already groaning. Inside, everything is wrapped, stacked, or wedged. Your writing case, a brass candle holder, for quills, sealing wax, slippers, a collapsible top hat you still don't know how to collapse, and 3 tins labeled beef, preserved. You will never open those tins. You will carry them 900 miles and leave them behind in someone's pantry, slightly dented and never remembered. And then there's the linen. Oh, the linen. You've got linen handkerchiefs, linen pillow slips, and linen waist straps for modesty in public places. You're told they're essential for dealing with the heat, which they are, until they soak through and cling to your spine like damp seaweed. Historians still debate whether British travelers truly needed this much fabric or if it was all a sort of sweaty performance, a way to look proper while slowly stewing in their own damp civility. You fold and refold, adjusting by an inch, then panic and unfold everything again. The steward's packing guide also recommended at least one full dress suit, in case of formal reception by native dignitaries. Never mind that you'll arrive looking like a roasted turnip after 2 weeks in a bullock cart. By midday, you're regretting nearly every garment. A passing tailor's boy sees your predicament and smirks. He's wearing a single cotton tunic and looks gloriously cool. You consider throwing out the entire pile and simply wrapping yourself in a bedsheet toga style, but the thought of what the club in Madras would say stops you cold. So you sigh, fold again, and try to make room for one more undershirt that you will absolutely lose by day 4. A light breeze passes, and you notice the faint aroma of camphor. You remember, vaguely, that you packed your linens with camphor blocks to keep moths at bay. The result is that everything now smells like a temple and a first aid box at once. Not unpleasant, but not exactly inviting. You try sitting on the lid of the trunk to close it. It doesn't budge. You remove the tea caddy, the hat, the candle holder, and repack again. Somehow, this time it fits, though the lid bulges slightly like a badly baked pie. And here's the best part. You still haven't packed a single pair of socks. French travelers, those who scribbled journals from beneath banyan trees or wrote dramatic letters back to Sussex, often skipped the trunk entirely and traveled with just a carpet bag and a knife. You find this idea both romantic and terrifying. Could you even survive with fewer than 8 handkerchiefs? Historians have uncovered travel diaries filled with minute clothing records. Monday, ruined waistcoat in river. Tuesday, lost cufflinks to monkey. Wednesday, wore evening coat in jungle out of necessity. You begin to realize you're not alone in over-preparing and underthinking. You glance around your room. A white pith helmet waits on a peg. Next to it, a folded woolen shawl, because someone told you Indian nights can be chilly. They lied. Beneath the bed, a pair of soft leather gloves. For formality. And heat stroke. At the last moment, you remember the linen laundry tags. Tiny stitched nameplates so your clothes don't get mixed up in the caravan. Never mind that you are the only Englishman on the journey. Your sleeves shall still declare, in full, E.H. Worthington, ESQ. Just as you finally close the trunk for good, a corner of one shirt sleeve flutters free like a white flag of surrender. You don't even care anymore. You tuck it in gently and fasten the latches. One trunk down. 4 more to go. The tea caddy goes in first. It's heavy, it's ornate, and it's filled with enough Darjeeling to host a diplomatic summit, assuming no one minds a bit of humidity-induced musk. You slide it into a padded nook in the second trunk, beside a tin of tonic powder that fizzes into something vaguely drinkable, provided you've already forgotten what clean water tastes like. In the 18th century, tea wasn't just a beverage. It was identity, ritual, therapy, and, depending on how long your caravan was stalled in the jungle, borderline currency. You brought your own leaves, of course you did. You don't trust the local market with your palate. What if they steep it wrong? What if they don't have a porcelain pot? So in go the implements: silver strainer, porcelain cup wrapped in handkerchiefs, a kettle that will probably never boil over a fire that will never stay lit. Still, it all goes in. Because comfort, even imaginary comfort, must be packed. Right beside the caddy, you nestle your bottles, amber glass, cork sealed, and ominously labeled with hand-scrawled notes like cinchona bark, for fevers and bitters, emergency only. The tonic water is intended to keep malaria at bay. You need to drink gallons daily, but you'd rather pretend a sip at breakfast counts. Historians still argue whether any of these tonics actually worked or whether the British just liked the excuse to mix them with gin. And yes, of course you packed gin. You swore you wouldn't, but somehow a slim green bottle found its way into your things. For medical use only, you told yourself. For sterilizing wounds, or possibly morale. The problem with traveling across India in the 1700s wasn't just the heat, or the terrain, or the tigers. It was the stomach. And you, like many others before you, are obsessed with preventing what the guidebooks gently called digestive irregularities and less gently called dysenteric misfortune. You pack salts and tinctures. You include a bright yellow powder one missionary swore by, though it smells like mustard and she's had a regrettable child. There's also something in a wax-sealed jar that might be pickled tamarind. Or a foot remedy. Hard to say. A fringe note from a Danish traveler recommended a decoction of clove and jaggery for stomach calm. Another journal praised chewing on dried orange peel with fervent faith. You toss both into a side pouch, just in case faith works better on Tuesdays. The medical chest, really a glorified wooden box with dividers, contains dozens of hopeful solutions to things you can't yet name. Scorpion sting? Peppermint oil. Fever? Willow bark. Snake bite? You're advised to ride in circles to stay awake while someone fetches help. Reassuring. Quinine, though not fully understood yet, is revered as a sort of fever-repelling godsend. You carry some, powdered and terribly bitter. You tried it once, and your mouth still hasn't forgiven you. Nevertheless, in it goes. Next, your prized tin of lozenges, rosewater for the throat, lavender for nerves, and licorice for, well, mainly for chewing. You also keep a lemon-scented balm in a metal disc the size of a coin, though it melted during your last train ride and now functions mostly as an aromatic smear. You glance at your supply list again. You've packed more treatments than socks, more elixirs than food. But priorities are priorities, and you're not about to become one of those wide-eyed memoirists who writes, "By day 3, I feared I might perish. By day 6, I rather hoped I would." What they don't tell you is how much comfort you draw from simply having the bottles. The cool glass, the clink of them shifting, the illusion of control. It's all theater, but it's your theater. You'll sip your tonic, adjust your linen collar, and pretend the jungle respects your effort. And then, of course, you pack the lemon drops. Not for illness. Just because they make the road feel 1 degree less grim. Somewhere beneath the soft pile of tonic-soaked optimism, you find the pistols. There are 2, both flintlock, both a bit too ornate to suggest actual expertise. You place them gingerly in a velvet-lined box beside powder horns, a cartridge pouch, and a cleaning rod you'll never use unless you're terribly bored. These pistols are insurance. For what? You're never entirely sure. Bandits, perhaps, or wild animals. More likely, they'll rust in your trunk or misfire dramatically at the worst possible moment. Still, no self-respecting 18th-century traveler crossed the Deccan Plateau without at least one firearm tucked somewhere near the spare shirts. The absurd part is, you've never fired either one. A steward demonstrated once in a courtyard back in Calcutta, the shot cracking through the air and setting off 3 parakeets and a shriek from the cook. You nodded solemnly at the time and then promptly forgot every instruction. Historians still argue whether these weapons were more for self-defense or self-deception. The romantic image of the solo Englishman fending off attackers with one hand while adjusting his cravat with the other doesn't tend to match the soggy, exhaustive reality. Right beside the guns goes your parasol, a delicate thing of oiled silk and bamboo, the kind that might belong to a duchess with strong opinions about glare. You unfold it and immediately struggle to fold it again. It squeaks, then sighs, then nearly decapitates a beetle on the windowsill. You don't want to get sunburned, and your wide-brimmed hat only goes so far. The parasol offers shade, mystery, and a vague sense that you've risen above the unwashed masses, even as your boots squelch with every step. Alongside the parasol, you pack a long, carved walking stick tipped with brass and utterly useless on anything but dry, flat ground. It wobbles in mud, jams in gravel, and once tripped you in a melon patch. Still, it looks distinguished, and that's what counts. As you rummage, your fingers brush a pouch of gunpowder sealed in pigskin. You pause, suddenly remembering the merchant in Pondicherry who warned you, never sleep near your own powder. One rat and it's all over. So naturally, you've packed it right under your pillow roll. Excellent. You also find, in a side compartment, a slim, dull dagger with mother-of-pearl inlay. Beautiful, inefficient, and very good at slicing mangoes. You slide it back beside your shaving razor and hope never to confuse the two. A quirky item catches your eye next, a rolled strip of canvas painted with vague jungle shapes, meant to unfurl as camouflage if you ever need to blend into foliage. It was a gift from an eccentric French trader who swore by it. You're pretty sure he was being sarcastic. There's a certain irony in your luggage. For every item designed to project power, guns, blades, marching boots, there's something delicate and ridiculous. You travel armed to the teeth, yet also carry scented soap and pressed flower paper for correspondence. You wedge everything carefully, but the parasol refuses to sit flat. So you balance it atop the pistols and secure it with your powder horn, hoping they won't fight. Then come the pouches, little leather ones stitched by someone far more patient than you. One contains flints, another holds cotton wadding, and a third, mysteriously, is labeled mischief. You don't remember packing it. You decide not to open it just yet. Night falls. You light a single oil lamp and sit beside your open trunk, cross-legged and faintly amused. Somewhere outside, an ox snorts. A lizard watches you from the ceiling with all the judgment of a customs officer. You think of the explorers who came before you, some of whom vanished into the forests, others who returned with drawings, diseases, or tales of tiger attacks that seemed a bit too convenient. Most likely, they packed just like you, too much, too little, and never quite the right thing. You consider tossing the pistols and replacing them with another tin of biscuits. You don't. But it's a nice thought. You wind your pocket watch for the third time today. It ticks in protest, slow and sluggish like it too regrets this journey. The brass casing is warming your hand, India's heat has already seeped into the mechanism, and the hands lag just slightly behind where they ought to be. You tap the glass gently, as if encouragement will help. It doesn't. The watch was a parting gift, a symbol of order, progress, and European precision. And here you are, surrounded by barking dogs, drumming cicadas, and absolutely no idea whether it's 4 p.m. or already time to panic. Historians still argue whether these imported timepieces were ever practical in tropical climates or just pocket-bound vanity. Next to the watch, you keep a miniature sundial, yes, really, and a chain fob engraved with your initials, now smudged with sweat. The sundial requires actual sun, of course, and you haven't seen direct sunlight since a passing monsoon dumped half a river on your camp. Still, you carry it. The idea of being able to tell the time somehow feels comforting, even if none of the methods work. Your traveling companions, if you can call them that, rely on a more practical timekeeper, roosters. They crow at vague intervals, but with shocking consistency. One guide swears the rooster is more accurate than your watch. You've begun to suspect he's right. You once overheard him muttering, "Englishman waits for tick-tock." I listen to Bird. Bird always wake. Hard to argue with that kind of logic. Still, you persist in wearing the watch. You polish it every night with the corner of a linen cloth you no longer care about. Even if it gains 5 minutes by morning, it looks trustworthy. The chain glints. It's weighty. People assume you know what time it is. And isn't that half the battle? Nearby, a box with other instruments rattles as you adjust your trunk. A compass, forever listing due west, sits beside a folding magnifier. The compass needle drifts uncertainly when you're near iron deposits, which is always, and sometimes spins like a nervous parrot when the cart bumps over stones. But it's brass and beautiful and reassuring in a vaguely seafaring way. You also carry a small travel calendar, a folded parchment with rotating days and lunar markings. You have no idea how it works, but it's impressive to look at. The moon is currently in a waxing phase, which might mean something useful if you weren't just trying to figure out whether today is Tuesday or not. The watch chimes once. Or maybe wheezes. Hard to say. You hold it to your ear and catch the faint metallic whir of a spring too tired to care. It still keeps time, in its own loose way, just like you still think you're following an itinerary. Remember that map from earlier? It says you should have reached the Ganges by now. But all you've seen for days are dry gullies and squirrels the size of terriers. You adjust your expectations, and your watch, by an hour. Problem solved. Quirky records from the time mention travelers marking time by temple bells, camel snorts, and the smell of bread in the morning breeze. One man wrote, "I wake at the same time the monkeys scream, always half past unbearable." You feel that in your bones. The absurd part is, the locals don't seem to worry about time. They know when to set up by the light in the dust, or when the shadows shrink under neem trees. They start journeys at midnight, or pause in the afternoon heat with no concern for your ticking, wheezing brass egg. You begin to envy their relationship with time. Yours feels like a battle. Theirs, a dance. You tuck the watch back into your waistcoat. It's heavy, slightly moist, and only a few minutes behind. Better than nothing. Certainly better than trusting your gut, which once told you it was lunchtime at 9:15 a.m. As the day cools and the air takes on that smoky sweet scent of evening fires, you glance up. The rooster crows again. You glance at the watch. The bird is, annoyingly, correct. You pull out the stack of crisp envelopes, each sealed with red wax and embossed with crests that no one within 300 miles will recognize. Letters of introduction, elegant, formal, and almost entirely useless. They bear names like "To the esteemed Raja of Bundelkund" or "To whom it may concern in the court of Hyderabad," written in looping cursive by someone who's never left Bath. You lay them out across your cot like a tarot spread, wondering which one, if any, might actually open a door or earn you a cup of tea. The truth is, these letters are your golden tickets into bureaucratic oblivion. In theory, they grease the wheels of diplomacy. In practice, they usually lead to confused stares, polite nods, and a hasty offer of mangoes. Historians still argue whether such letters carried any weight in Indian courts or were merely ceremonial flourishes, meant to comfort the foreign sender more than impress the recipient. You try reading one aloud, practicing your tone for when you inevitably need to present it. The bearer of this document, Mr. E. H. Worthington, is a gentleman of fine standing and noble intention. You trail off. You sound like someone advertising a suspicious tonic. Most local officials will have no idea who the sender is, and those who do will wonder why that person couldn't bother writing in Persian, Urdu, or at least Hindi. You imagine handing the letter to a dignitary surrounded by courtiers, only to see it passed around like an exotic puzzle. Still, you pack them carefully. They're your illusion of preparation, little bundles of trust in the long-dead Lord Gloucester's handwriting. And they smell faintly of rosewater and ink, one of the few scents in your luggage not fighting for dominance. One of the letters is already smudged from the rain. You try to reseal the wax, only to discover that your sealing stick has gone soft from the heat. When you light it, it droops like a sugared candle, dripping across your thumb and making you yelp. You curse, softly, as the wax leaves a red blister. The letter now has a wax blob instead of a seal, and your thumb throbs like it's punishing you for colonial overconfidence. You decide to let that one stay informal. A strange little side pouch holds visiting cards, a dozen tiny rectangles of stiff cream paper, each bearing your name and a slightly exaggerated title. You consider them a sort of portable reputation, ready to be handed to anyone vaguely important looking. Most will become bookmarks or fire starters. But they feel official, and they take up almost no space, so in they go. You also carry a small diary meant for recording who gave you what letter, when, and what the result was. So far, it contains only 2 entries. Gave letter to railway officer. He asked if I wanted oranges. And, presented letter at caravanserai. Man read it upside down. Nodded. Gave me soup. Tucked behind the diary, you find a folded sheet in an unfamiliar hand. It's a recommendation from a chaplain in Madras who once sat beside you at dinner. He'd scribbled a kind note on your bravery in eating pickled mango with curry. You hadn't meant to impress anyone, you just didn't know what it was. Still, you kept the note. In a more pragmatic pouch, you've tucked a few coins, mostly rupees, a few odd copper tokens, and a token bearing Queen Charlotte's profile. You hope the mix will impress someone. Probably it won't. For the sake of balance, you also carry a letter of apology. Not sealed, not addressed, just a blank apology in case you deeply offend someone. You tell yourself it's wise planning, but secretly, you know it's for you. A kind of moral insurance. Eventually, you stack the letters back into their case, wrapping them in a thin oilskin cloth that does very little against moisture but makes you feel competent. You fasten the leather strap and tuck them into the corner of your trunk, just beneath the edge of your linen shirts and directly beside your pride. One of these letters might work. Maybe. Or it might flutter into a monsoon drain or be stolen by a goat. Both have happened to travelers before. You remind yourself not to expect too much from paper diplomacy in a place where conversation, gesture, and shared sweets go further than any seal. You unfold the lid of your portable writing desk, an ingenious contraption that opens like a magician's box and smells faintly of cedar and desperation. Inside are compartments of all sizes, carefully whittled to fit quills, ink bottles, sealing wax, wafers, and sheets of parchment that now curl like potato crisps in the damp air. One drawer sticks slightly, you give it a gentle jiggle and it pops open, revealing a lump of melted red wax and a half-eaten biscuit you swore you lost in Bombay. The writing desk is your lifeline to civilization, or so you're told. It's your anchor, your paper brain, your chance to record the heat-stroke-induced hallucinations that scholars will one day read aloud at symposiums. Except, you barely write anything. Oh, you mean to. You always mean to. You sit on the veranda of whatever rest house the monsoon hasn't flooded, and you dip your quill into the ink pot. You begin a sentence. Today I witnessed a merchant balance 13 clay pots upon his head. None fell, and then your elbow knocks the inkwell, and the page becomes a Rorschach test. You label it abstract expressionism and turn the sheet over. The wax seals are worse. At sea level, they worked fine. But now, up in the muggy interior, the heat turns your wax into something between syrup and regret. When you press your signet ring into the soft red puddle, it sticks. You yank it away too fast, and half the seal comes with it, leaving a vague blob that could mean anything from EH to help. Historians still debate whether these traveling desks were designed for writing, or merely for the illusion of being busy. They contain drawers within drawers, sliding panels, secret compartments. You once discovered a hidden flap behind your inkwell and found a dead spider and a coin from 1723. It's possible the desk knows more about this journey than you do. The parchment fares no better. What doesn't curl wilts. What doesn't wilt gets speckled by insects. You bought it from a proper British stationer, so naturally, it's allergic to both humidity and movement. Half your letters home read like love notes from a drowning man. Still, there's something calming about unpacking the desk each evening, even if you only manage a sentence or two. You arrange your tools like a monk laying out sacred instruments. There's a peculiar satisfaction in trimming a quill just so, or blotting excess ink with a square of velvet. You rarely finish a thought, but you always begin one. Next to the parchment, you keep a tiny brass ruler. You don't know why. You never use it, but it looks excellent beside your blotter, so you polish it nightly. Your wax wafers, small, circular, and beige, were meant to simplify sealing. Just warm them, press, and done. Except they don't melt properly anymore, and one of them smells suspiciously like cheese. You use it anyway. The recipient can ponder its implications. On a hopeful day, you start a letter to your sister. My dearest Evelyn, I have seen such birds as would make a painter weep. But before you can describe the colors, a beetle the size of a thimble lands on your wrist, and you spill ink again. You try to turn it into a cloud, but clouds don't have wings and legs. You've begun keeping a side journal, not of experiences, but of failed attempts. A few pages read, ink dried before sentence 3, gecko defecated mid-thought, and blotter stuck to forehead during nap. At the bottom of the desk, wrapped in a silk kerchief, is a tiny vial of lavender water. For refreshing the air, you were told. You open it and dab a bit on your wrist. It mixes interestingly with the scent of boiled rice and boot polish. Every so often, you receive a reply, months later, crumpled and rain-dotted. You hold it delicately, unfold the creases, and see that someone back in Bath has written, "Do take care not to overexert yourself." The climate sounds most uncooperative. You stare at the letter, your sweat dripping quietly onto the envelope, and think, uncooperative is one word for it. Still, you repack the desk with care. You wipe the inkwell rim. You stack the curling parchment. You close the lid, fasten the brass latch, and slide it under your cot, where it will rattle faintly every time you toss in your sleep. One day you'll write everything down. Not tonight, but definitely, one day. You flip open your sketchbook, its leather cover worn soft at the corners, pages smudged with hope and humidity. Somewhere on page 3 is a drawing of a banyan tree that looked much better in your head. On page 4, a temple outline started confidently, then gave up halfway through when a cow blocked your view and refused to move for 45 minutes. You tried to sketch around her. She moved and blinked, unimpressed. Sketching was meant to be your noble pastime. A visual log of wonders encountered. Instead, it's mostly elephants that look like hairy potatoes and portraits of guides who insisted you pay double for sitting still. You reach for your graphite stick and discover that it's melted into the binding again. Lovely. You once imagined sitting serenely on a hillside, birdsong in your ear, calmly rendering the horizon. What you got was ants on your ankles, a thundercloud overhead, and a monkey making off with your best pencil. Historians still argue whether 18th century travel artists were geniuses or just extremely stubborn. Still, you try. You find a dryish page and begin sketching the outline of a mosque scene through banana trees. The lines wobble, your hands sweaty, the page already beginning to buckle like a poorly laid cobblestone. You pause, fan it gently, and mutter to yourself like a madman with an overripe peach. There's something oddly soothing about this ritual. Even if the results are crooked, they're yours. No one can say you didn't try. You sketch what you can before dusk rolls in, smearing your lines into something almost impressionistic. You once showed a drawing to a Dutch botanist who nodded and said, "Ah yes, a chicken." It was a camel. You never forgave him. One of your fringe souvenirs is a package of beetle wing fragments, shimmering green, collected from sari markets in Benares. You'd intended to glue them into the margin of a particularly vibrant sketch. You never did. The glue turned to jelly in your side pouch. Now the beetle wings live in a folded kerchief, glinting accusingly every time you open it. You try a few human figures. A porter leaning on a pole, face lost in shadow. A woman balancing a water pot, her posture perfect and her expression absolutely impossible to capture. You shade her lightly and move on. You never get the eyes right. At the back of your sketchbook are pages filled with observations. Not drawings, just impressions. The smell of turmeric in morning air. The way temple bells sound sharper at dusk. How every color seems warmer here, like the sun has soaked into the pigment itself. Your pen bleeds through the paper in places, but the words stay. You find, pressed flat near the middle, a marigold bloom you stole from a wedding garland. It's dry now, brittle and brown at the edges, but it still holds the faintest scent. You consider sketching it. You don't. Some things are better left crumbling quietly between two forgotten pages. You once met another traveler who brought an entire watercolor set, all neatly cased in mahogany. He showed you a portrait of a mango tree so lifelike you swore you could hear flies buzzing around it. You asked his secret. He replied, 3 brushes, and never let the paper touch your knee. Wise words. Shame you promptly forgot them the next time you tried to sketch on a bumpy ox cart. One of your earliest drawings, now water-stained and barely visible, is of your room in Madras. A chair, a mosquito net, a ceiling fan you were convinced was going to fall and slice you open like a fruit. You keep it anyway. Even bad sketches are better than none. As twilight fades, you tuck the sketchbook into a cloth sleeve, wrap the last graphite stub in paper, and store them beneath your rolled shawl. A few insects buzz against the lantern light, tapping faint Morse code against the glass. You think, briefly, of what these pages will mean someday. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe a museum will call them an honest view of colonial perceptions. Maybe someone will just say, this guy really couldn't draw horses. You hope for the latter. It feels more accurate. You open the wooden crate with the careful reverence of someone disarming a trap. Inside, vials, packets, jars, and things that should probably not be this sticky. The spice box, or perhaps more accurately, the cabinet of smells. Every traveler worth their salt, pun intended, carries one. Yours, however, leans more chaotic than curated. First out is a glass vial of cardamom pods, fragrant and still pungent despite their journey. Next to it, a tin of cloves so strong you once sneezed them clear across a guesthouse porch. The idea was to enhance bland food and impress local cooks with your knowledge of Eastern flavors. The reality is you mostly chew 1 clove a day to mask the taste of boiled lentils and regret. A lump of ginger root, gnarled and somewhat resentful, rattles in a paper wrap. You meant to slice it into tea, but forgot. Now it resembles a fossil. Still, into the pouch it goes. You tell yourself you'll remember next time. You won't. In another compartment, wrapped in wax cloth, you find salves, a neem paste with alarming side effects. It turned your fingernail green once, a clove emmet concoction for toothache, and a pungent mustard balm that works miracles on sore muscles, assuming you don't mind smelling like a sandwich. And then there's the jar. The one labeled pickled gourd, 1779. You don't remember packing it. You don't remember buying it. But you're almost certain it has followed you across 3 provinces. You give it a cautious shake. Nothing happens. Probably for the best. Historians still argue whether travelers brought these salves and spices for actual use or simply to feel like they had options when their bowels declared independence. Either way, you carry yours like a rattling pharmacy of hope. Next, your stash of powders, stored in tight-wrapped wax packets, scribbled with names like black salt, tamarind stone dust, and warming mix. You don't remember what warming mix does. You just remember the time you added it to rice and spent the evening hiccuping uncontrollably. Not everything smells nice. One vial, corked but clearly losing the battle, emits a faint funk of vinegar, mildew, and daring. You sniff it carefully. It's the fermented gooseberry tonic, meant to invigorate the blood. It once removed varnish from a wooden table. You pack it away quickly. Beside it, nestled in fabric like a precious gem, is your tiny supply of saffron. Threads delicate as butterfly legs, bright as fire. It's the one item you truly treasure, not for its usefulness but for the way it makes you feel like a traveling poet. You sprinkled it in rice once and spent the entire meal pretending you were a Mogul prince. You unwrap a small pouch of dried mango slices, tart and leathery, their edges curled from age. You suck on one absently as you sort, savoring the sharpness. It cuts through the heat like a cold whisper. You make a note to ration them, then eat another. One of the stranger entries in your kit is a brownish paste with a faintly menthol edge. A passing German physician insisted it cured headaches, stomach cramps, and heartache. You've tried it for all three. Results inconclusive, though it did temporarily blind you in one eye. You still carry it. Because hope, like mustard, lingers. At the very bottom of the box, folded into a bit of embroidered cloth, is your show item, a small, corked bottle of rose attar. You were told it would win you favor in royal courts, soothe aching nerves, and mask the scent of unwashed socks. Only the last has been tested, with mixed results. You repack everything carefully, tucking cotton wadding around the more enthusiastic jars. You pause only once, hand hovering over a small block of myrrh. You still don't know what it's for. You pack it anyway. The crate closes with a satisfying thunk. Outside, the air smells of rain and cooking ghee. Inside your luggage, it smells of spice, salve, and a faint trace of medical overconfidence. You feel, for a moment, unusually prepared. And then you remember, you forgot to pack matches. You lift the fan from its pouch with great ceremony. It's carved from ivory and sandalwood, ribbed with impossibly delicate patterns, and folds open like a sigh. In theory, it's a simple tool for cooling your flushed face or swatting at flies with grace. In practice, it creaks on the open, snaps on the close, and occasionally pinches your thumb in a way that feels personal. But it's beautiful, and that counts for something. You hold it aloft, give it a flick, and immediately get a splinter from the grip. You fan yourself anyway, slowly, regally, as if you were a minor French noblewoman pretending not to notice the heat. You are extremely aware of the heat. The fan only helps if you don't move too much. If you wave too hard, the air gets warmer. And it looks like you're panicking. Beside it in your kit are other items that serve more aesthetic than practical purposes. A small mirror, now fogged at the edges, a pair of silver cufflinks you haven't worn once, and a tiny vial of bergamot oil that smells better in theory than on a sunburned wrist. The fan has followed you since Calcutta. You bought it from a vendor who claimed it was once used in a palace. You were impressed until you saw a dozen more just like it in the next bazaar. Still, this one has history, at least to you. It's been through jungle rains, dropped in a stream, and once saved your face from a particularly rude mosquito. That counts. Historians still argue whether such ornamental tools had genuine function or whether they were symbols of European travelers clinging to elegance as they slowly melted across the subcontinent. You know which camp you're in. You once refused to eat lunch because your napkin had gone missing. That was a low point. Wrapped in soft cotton is your second fan, less delicate, made of woven palm fronds. It's bigger, louder, and blessedly unbreakable. Your porter uses one just like it, with 10 times the efficiency and none of the ceremony. You keep yours in your satchel for emergencies, like meals in unshaded courtyards or sudden drafts of overheated air. And then there's the strange little item you swore you'd never need, a nose filter. Yes, really. A small cage of muslin and wire, meant to sit beneath your nostrils and screen out offensive smells. You tried it once. It made you look like a startled walrus and did absolutely nothing to block the aroma of drying fish. Still, it lives in your pouch, waiting for the perfect occasion. There isn't one. You also find, to your mild horror, a hand fan gifted by a Dutch widow in Goa, painted with bright blue parrots and what appears to be a naked cherub wrestling a banana. It is horrifying. You keep it anyway, for emergencies or threats. And, tucked into your journal case, a square of folded linen that smells faintly of lavender, your last decent handkerchief. You guard it like a relic. You've used others for cleaning spectacles, shoeing lizards, polishing brass, even as an impromptu sock. But not this one. This one is for dignity. You tell yourself you'll know when the time is right to use it. You won't. A local clerk once asked why you carried 2 fans when your forehead still gleamed like a tavern doorknob. You had no good answer. Just a smile and a quick excuse about airflow dynamics. He didn't believe you, but he nodded kindly. You use the ivory fan again, slower this time, careful not to dislocate a panel. The breeze is gentle, almost imaginary. But still, it's there. A whisper of comfort in the swelter. Sometimes, That's all you need. You hear the clink before you even open the crate. Bottles rattling against straw, a tiny orchestra of glass and hope. This is the wine. Or, more accurately, this is what's left of the wine. You packed a dozen bottles, painstakingly selected, lovingly wrapped, and optimistically recorded in your inventory as 12 fine bottles, various. A generous haul meant for evenings of quiet dignity or sudden diplomacy. But as you open the lid and peer inside, the number is not 12. It's 8, maybe 7.5. You lift one carefully. The label, once crisp, is now smudged with something sticky. Possibly sap. Possibly sorrow. You turn it gently. There's a faint crack in the neck, sealed by nothing but optimism. You set it down quickly. Another bottle lies sideways, cork half pushed by heat, contents long since soaked into the packing straw. That one had been your favorite. You consider a moment of silence, then eat a biscuit instead. Historians still debate whether 18th century wine shipments stood any real chance of surviving Indian journeys intact. Some say careful packing and cooler weather made it possible. Others argue that unless you drank it within 100 miles of port, you were basically fermenting disappointment. Next to the wine sits a smaller crate of spirits, less prone to spoilage, but far more prone to vanishing. You suspect one bottle may have been borrowed in Madras. Another, well, you drank that one on purpose, when the dysentery kicked in and all your quinine options tasted like chalk soaked in betrayal. You still have 3 full bottles of port. Sweet, thick, dark like treacle and nostalgia. You ration it by the teaspoon, usually poured into your cracked enamel cup after long days when everything, map, compass, and intestinal tract, has failed you. Also present, and somehow untouched, a half bottle of Madeira. You brought it to impress someone. You forget who. You haven't met anyone yet who wants to sip warm, oxidized wine in the tropics. You keep it anyway, because it looks impressive when nestled beside your leather-bound books and tin of raisins. And then, of course, there's the sherry. The taste is debatable. You suspect the bottle has spent too much time near your medicinal powders. It now carries hints of clove, camphor, and possibly regret. Still, you'd rather sip suspicious sherry than explain to a caravan guide why you're drinking boiled river water again. At the very bottom of the crate, wrapped in rags, is a squat bottle of something unlabeled. You remember buying it from a Portuguese trader who swore it was for courage. You've never dared open it. You suspect it might be lamp oil. It has a cork, at least. That's something. One of your travel books recommended wrapping bottles in soaked rice husks to prevent breakage. Another said to carry only local spirits. You tried toddy once and ended up talking to your boots for an hour. So now, it's mostly European bottles, half empty, half leaking, all precious. A note in your journal reads, "If I die, tell my sister the claret went first. Tell no one about the brandy." You cross it out. You rewrite it underneath, "Just bury me with the port. She'll understand." You sit cross-legged, sipping a thimble of the good stuff, watching moths batter themselves against the lantern. The night smells like pepper and wet grass. In the next room, someone snores, a slow, humid rhythm. You think of the wine as ballast. It weighs your trunk, yes, but it also steadies your nerves. A tiny luxury in the middle of chaotic soil, burning skies, and unpredictable latrines. When the road has been too long and your shoes too wet, a mouthful of port becomes a moment of dignity. Just don't let anyone know how much you've drunk. The steward at the last way station already gave you a look when you asked for salt to rim a tin cup. One bottle cracked. One went missing. One may be haunted. But the rest remain. And tomorrow's heat will demand another capful of calm. You unclip the leather lid of your compass case with the hopeful flourish of someone expecting direction. Instead, the needle shivers briefly and then spins in a lazy circle like it's considering its options. You sigh. Again. The compass was gifted to you by an uncle who never traveled farther than Sussex but insisted it had guiding energy. He meant well. What he didn't mention was that magnetic interference in India is, shall we say, enthusiastic. Iron deposits, metal cooking pots, even your boots, somehow, seem to confuse it. Today, north is apparently in the direction of your chamber pot. Historians still debate how reliable 18th century compasses were in the field. Some insist they saved countless lives. Others argue they mostly offered the illusion of certainty. You, staring at the gently rotating needle while your caravan team points wordlessly toward the correct road, are leaning toward the latter. The compass isn't alone. It lives in a small wooden box you've romantically labeled instruments of orientation. Inside, a folding spyglass, a chipped sextant you absolutely do not know how to use, and a collection of field notes detailing sunrise times from last year. In Denmark. Why you packed those remains unclear. You remember the moment you first used the compass in the field. You were trying to locate the entrance to an old caravanserai just outside Putna. You confidently turned east and walked straight into a grain merchant's ox cart. He laughed. You bled. The compass shrugged. In your journal, you started a section called False Norths. Entries include: compass pointed toward goat. Goat walked away. Reoriented. Entire village laughed when I used it to find the latrine. Needle spinning. Not metaphoric this time. It's not all bad, though. The spyglass works wonderfully, if you don't mind a bit of smudge around the lens and a minor crack that makes every distant object look slightly haunted. You used it yesterday to observe a palace dome in the distance. Or possibly a large onion basket. Perspective is difficult through heat shimmer. You also carry a string-tied sundial that needs exact placement and cooperative sunlight. The sun, of course, is rarely cooperative. On cloudy days, the dial lies in the dust like a grumpy turtle. You once used it as a coaster. Still, every morning you consult your gear with the solemnity of a ship's captain, despite being nowhere near the sea and possessing no nautical skills. You adjust the compass. You polish the spyglass. You rotate the sundial by a few hopeful degrees. Then you close the lid and ask your guide which way to go. He always points. He never smirks. You appreciate that. There's a certain peace in accepting that these tools are less about precision and more about ritual. Holding the compass makes you feel prepared. Raising the spyglass makes you feel alert. Checking the sextant, well, that's just for drama. You haven't touched it since it nearly fell apart on a windy plateau. You once met a French trader who swore he navigated solely by the stars and the way dogs barked in different regions. You nodded respectfully and added dog-based geography to your growing list of things you don't understand. In a hidden pocket of your map roll, you keep a hand-drawn chart of stars as seen from the southern Deccan. The ink has faded, and one corner is burned from a lantern incident. Still, you look at it some nights, trying to spot Orion's belt, even though half the sky seems to move faster here than you're used to. The stars don't guide you, but they do keep you company. You wrap your compass in a square of silk, not because it needs protection but because you still believe in treating the idea of navigation with respect. You slip it back into the box, along with the notes, the glass, the dreams of finding the right road by yourself. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again. The path will fork, or curve, or disappear altogether. And you'll take out your compass, wait for the needle to spin, and smile when it finally lands on somewhere. You stare at your boots the way one might regard a particularly vengeful ex. They started out fine, shiny, sturdy, even smug. Hand-stitched leather, imported from England, high enough to guard your ankles from snake bites and, supposedly, stylish enough to turn heads at a colonial ball. Now they're cracked, swollen, and crusted with the memory of 16 different types of mud. You sit on the edge of your cot, wrestling one boot off with the other, grunting like an amateur wrestler in a losing match. When it finally slips free, your foot emerges red, raw, and blistered in 3 distinct regions. You name the largest blister Lord Swellingshire and consider writing him into your will. Your feet have been in open rebellion since day 4. You tried everything: double socks, linen wraps, talcum powder, and a folk remedy involving banana peels that you still think was a prank. Nothing worked. The boots, like most colonial inventions, were built for looking brave on porches, not walking 80 miles through thorn bushes. Historians still argue whether European footwear was a practical disaster or a deliberate exercise in masochism. One letter from 1791 describes a traveler who ditched his boots entirely and completed his journey barefoot, claiming it was liberating. He also had to be carried the last 5 miles on a stretcher. Interpret as you will. In your kit is a small satchel filled with first aid tools, bandages, gauze, salves, and one mysterious tin labeled simply, for irritation. You unwrap a strip of cotton and apply it gingerly, wincing as it sticks to yesterday's aloe. You once tried leech therapy, just to see. It worked, in the sense that the leeches seemed to enjoy it. Tucked beside the medical pouch is a sewing kit intended for clothing repair, but now primarily used to restitch the soles of your boots. Your last attempt resulted in a needle jammed under your fingernail. You didn't scream. You simply bit your lip and stared into the distance like a tragic opera character. Also, under your cot, sandals. Woven, open-toed, and blessedly breathable. You bought them from a man who claimed they were blessed by a saint and guaranteed not to slip in rain. They did. Twice. But they're light and forgiving, and your feet don't look at you with betrayal when you wear them. You consider switching permanently. You remember reading about an Austrian officer who brought 7 pairs of boots for a 2-month journey. He wore all of them out. On the last day, he fashioned shoes from a saddlebag. You admire his ingenuity but fear his hygiene. One of your porters walks barefoot. Always. Through gravel, thorn, and hot stone. You once asked if it hurt. He looked at you, blinked, and said, "Feet are feet." You thought about that for days. Among your more questionable choices, packing 3 tins of boot polish and a horsehair brush. You still polish them, out of habit or guilt. They gleam dully, like relics from a more optimistic time. You've begun speaking to them at night. Not in full sentences. Just quiet reassurances that the worst is over. It isn't. You rebandage your heel and slip on a loose cloth slipper for the evening. You try not to limp as you rise, but your boots see it. You feel their judgment. You kick one gently under the cot and ignore its little sigh. You once imagined arriving at a foreign court, boots polished, cravat crisp, stepping confidently onto polished marble floors. Now, you're more likely to shuffle unwrapped in mosquito netting, smelling faintly of turmeric paste and despair, shoes trailing strips of palm frond. You consider writing a letter to your bootmaker. Something simple: "Dear sir, these boots have taken me far. Too far. Please send sympathy and fresh insoles." Instead, you wrap your sore foot in a cool cloth, sip half a cup of medicated port, and whisper a soft promise to your blisters that tomorrow will be gentler. You crouch beside your bedding roll and tug free the iron latch case containing your collapsible bed, a marvel of engineering, equal parts cot, trap, and ongoing threat to your fingers. It unfolds with a screeching protest, one leg catching your shin and another springing open with the energetic malice of a loaded mousetrap. You swear softly. The bed replies with a thud and a wobble. It's made of canvas stretched over a wood and brass frame that folds like an accordion and weighs roughly as much as a modest goat. You brought it because every seasoned traveler insisted, "Don't sleep on the ground unless you fancy becoming part of the food chain." Reasonable. But they didn't warn you that setting it up would feel like assembling a banshee-powered umbrella in a wind tunnel. Still, once it's up, crookedly, always crookedly, it offers a few precious inches of elevation. You can almost forget about the ants, the damp, and that unfortunate evening in Benares when a mongoose curled up beside you and refused to leave. Strapped beneath the bed frame is your mosquito curtain, a fine mesh stitched from translucent cotton, once white, now vaguely tea-stained by travel and time. You hang it around the frame like draping a gauzy coffin. It's your sanctuary. Your last line of defense. Your fabric-based faith. You've tried sleeping without it. Once. You woke with 27 mosquito bites, 3 mysterious welts, and the distinct feeling that something had watched you breathe. You swore then, and forevermore, that mesh was your religion. Historians still argue whether collapsible beds were a sign of civil superiority or just elaborate self-inflicted punishment. One famous general swore by his military-grade folding field bed right up until it collapsed during an inspection, taking his dignity, and half the coffee service, with it. Your curtain is held in place by cords tied to the bedposts. When the wind picks up, it flutters gently, like a ghost with social anxiety. You watch it settle and imagine you're safe. It helps. Sort of. On the small camp table beside your bed sits your nightstand kit, 1 oil lamp, 1 book, unread, a tin of ginger biscuits, and a water flask wrapped in damp cloth to keep it cool. You reach for the flask and take a slow sip, trying not to notice the beetle that skitters across the floorboards with an air of ownership. The cot creaks beneath you as you lie back, listening to the familiar groans of wood and rust. You try not to move too much. The joints are moody. Last week, you shifted at midnight and the entire thing folded inward like a soft-shell crab, trapping you in a fabric cocoon of rage and disbelief. But tonight, it holds. You exhale. You stare up at the ceiling, the thatch, the flickering shadows, the single lizard that always returns to the same rafter. You name him Charles. Charles does not care. Your mosquito net billows once, responding to the whisper of your breath or perhaps the subtle insult of a nearby breeze. You glance toward the latch that's supposed to hold it closed. It's come undone again, as it always does. You retie it with a twist of string, mentally adding repair net hook to tomorrow's long and unlikely to-do list. One evening, a traveler passing through showed you his bedroll, just a woven mat and a cotton sheet. He slept soundly under the stars while you spent 20 minutes convincing your cot not to murder you. You admired his simplicity. You also envied his bug bites. In the end, your folding bed is less about comfort and more about familiarity. It creaks like home. It smells like sweat and camphor. And it keeps you half a foot above a world that crawls, slithers, and occasionally chirps ominously. You wrap yourself in a light sheet, adjust your lantern wick to the lowest glow, and listen to the jungle sounds outside your mesh cocoon, a rustle, a sigh, the distant cough of a night-walking animal with large teeth and questionable manners. You whisper to the net, hold fast. It always does. More or less. You stir the embers of your travel kitchen with the sad optimism of someone who still believes heat can come from hope alone. The copper pot before you sits squat and unimpressed, balanced precariously on 3 stones you arranged with the precision of a Renaissance sculptor and the success rate of a blindfolded goat. You forgot the firewood. Again. You had some. A nice bundle, even. Then came the sudden downpour outside Sauger, followed by the enthusiastic cart driver who used your bundle as makeshift wool wedges. You can't even be mad, it worked. But now, you're here, sitting beside a cold pot of lentils, hoping the air itself might warm them by sheer force of will. Your kitchen kit is impressive in theory. Brass tongs, copper pans, a folding knife, 2 spoons, a tiny spice tin that rattles like a maraca when you walk, and a collapsible tripod that functions mostly as a collapsible hazard. You've cooked perhaps 5 actual meals. The rest of the time, you've gnawed on hard biscuits or borrowed from local cooks, who somehow conjure feasts from 3 pebbles and a single onion. The copper pot, by the way, is dented. You dropped it on day 9 while trying to scare away a particularly bold monkey. The monkey won. The pot still bears the dent, more emotional than structural. Historians still argue whether travelers actually cooked for themselves or simply enjoyed the illusion of self-reliance before begging for dough from the nearest household. One journal described a complete travel kitchen with 12 utensils, a chimney pipe, and a butter churn. The author later admitted he never used it once. He just carried it because the coolies needed something to do. You have no chimney pipe. You have a single cracked ladle and a wooden spoon that has, against all odds, become your favorite possession. It stirs, it taps, it occasionally disciplines misbehaving pots. You once used it to defend your lunch from a crow. Your meal tonight is theoretical. A packet of lentils soaked earlier now sits in cold water, thickening into a beige sludge that smells vaguely nutritious. You sprinkle in a pinch of spice, give it a stir, and try not to cry. Your matches are damp. Your kindling is damp. You are, emotionally, damp. There is a moment, every night, when you consider not eating. Just curling up in your bed cocoon and pretending that hunger is a temporary illusion. But then your stomach growls like an offended mongoose, and you reach again for the useless flint. You tried using a travel stove once. A clever contraption with a compartment for coal and a lid that doubled as a frying pan. It exploded during assembly. You since switched to the more reliable method of sitting very still and hoping someone else is cooking nearby. Tonight, there is no nearby. Just the slow rustle of trees and the mournful plop of a frog you've begun to consider naming. In desperation, you unwrap one of your last remaining rations, a wax-sealed package of hardtack. It requires a hammer to break and 2 cups of liquid to swallow. You soak it in your lentils. It does not soften. You chew it anyway. You regret it immediately. One of your fellow travelers, a wiry man from Naples, swore by carrying pickled eggs in a tin strapped to his thigh. He offered you one. You declined. You've regretted that ever since. You rummage for your emergency mango pickle. It's sharp, fiery, and completely capable of disguising the fact that your lentils are room temperature and taste like dust soup. You dab a bit on the edge of your tin plate and try to pretend you're enjoying yourself. The plate is slightly bent. You blame the monkey. Again. Eventually, you give up. You set the pot aside, cover it with a cloth to keep out curious insects and gods, and reach for the last biscuit in your food pouch. It's stale, but it's dry, and it doesn't require matches. A triumph. As you chew, the wind picks up. Somewhere nearby, someone else is cooking. You can smell it, onions, maybe garlic, and something with real spice and heat. You close your eyes and pretend it's yours. Just for a moment. You tell yourself you'll cook properly tomorrow. You won't. But the dream persists. You squint down at the stack of books near your trunk, 4 thick volumes on Indian botany, their spines stubborn, their corners already softened by humidity and mild despair. They've traveled with you across rivers, plateaus, and at least 2 nearly vertical goat trails. You've opened them maybe 3 times. The top one, Flora Indica, features an engraving of a mango tree that looks oddly smug. You lugged it from Calcutta, convinced you'd be identifying rare herbs by week 2. Instead, you've mostly used it to squash mosquitoes and, once, to anchor your tent flap during a windstorm. You never meant to bring so many. But when you were preparing, the society insisted, one must document local vegetation. Compare, contrast, classify. So you packed the books dutifully, alongside your flask, your collapsible chair, and exactly 0 useful knowledge of plants. Each book weighs about as much as a decent roast goose. Together, they form a scholarly barricade at the bottom of your kit, cushioning more useful things, like extra socks and your sense of humor. Historians still argue whether these tomes contributed meaningfully to science or just served as intellectual ballast for travelers trying to justify their passage. You once tried to identify a flowering vine that crept into your tent. Page after page of botanical diagrams, all inked in crisp European lines, offered nothing that looked remotely similar. You finally asked a local farmer. He glanced at it and said, "That's snake leaf. Don't touch. It burns." You dropped it immediately and wrote "Consult Farmer" before book in the margin of page 173. One of the volumes, Rare Medicinal Shrubs of the Subcontinent, includes recipes that sound more like curses: powdered lizard tail mixed with honey, bark steeped in milk for 7 days under moonlight, ash of goat horn blown into a wound. You've bookmarked none of these. You did try one concoction, something about soaking fenugreek seeds and mixing them with crushed neem. The smell haunted your blanket for 3 days, and your guide refused to walk beside you until the scent faded. Another volume, printed in 1758, includes an entire chapter on plants that look like they shouldn't be touched. The author's description of one tree includes the phrase "unwholesome aura." You underline that. It felt relatable. You sometimes read a page or 2 before sleep, not for knowledge, but for the comfort of long sentences and familiar Latin. There's something oddly soothing about leaf morphology when your feet are blistered and your rice is still uncooked. You trace the illustrations with a fingertip, appreciating the care, even as the actual plant before you laughs in unfamiliar angles.